Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something that sounds pretty economic on the surface. What happens if tariffs are imposed on India?
Right.
But, as our sources show, it's actually much, much bigger than that. It's more like a geopolitical chess match with some really high stakes.
Absolutely. Huge implications for global power dynamics.
Exactly. So our deep dive today, it's based on a couple of key sources. We've got parts of an analysis called India Tariffs, Geopolitical Risk in the Indo-Pacific, and also this really fascinating 10-year Indo-Pacific geoeconomic forecast.
Yeah, that forecast paints quite a picture.
It really does. Our mission here is to sort of unpack why hitting India with tariffs isn't just about, trade deficits or bottom lines.
It goes way beyond that.
We want to explore how decisions like these could really shake up the global balance of power, particularly in that vital Indo-Pacific region.
Crucial region.
Yeah. So get ready. We're going to connect some dots. Economics, security, global influence. It all ties together in ways you might not expect.
Oh.
So before we get into the impact, the consequences of tariffs, maybe we should step back a bit.
Good idea. Set the stage.
Yeah, exactly. To really get what's at stake, why is India such a critical player over there? What makes its position so important?
Well, what's really fascinating, I think, is India's role as this essential counterweight to China.
Right, China's growing influence.
Exactly. Both military and economic influence in the Indo-Pacific. And India's geography, is just indispensable. It commands the Indian Ocean, controls key sea lanes, these maritime choke points.
Super important for shipping.
Crucial. Absolutely crucial for global shipping and also for kind of deterring Chinese naval expansion.
Okay.
And then there's the Quad. India is a key member, alongside the U.S., Japan, Australia. That coalition is seen as pretty core to security in the region. But, and this is important, India really values its strategic autonomy. It does this careful balancing act, maintaining ties with the West, but also with Russia and with the global South. It walks a tightrope.
So imposing tariffs, that sounds like it could really upset that balance. Risk souring relations just when, maybe, the West needs India more aligned.
Precisely. It's a very delicate time. Stronger alignment is often seen as the goal.
So this really isn't just about T-shirts and technology, is it? It's a much bigger strategic game.
Not at all. It's about the whole strategic landscape.
Okay, that makes sense. It extends far beyond just the trade numbers. So any action like tariffs that jeopardizes this alignment could have these big, maybe unintended consequences.
Definitely. Ripple effects.
And our source material really digs into that, doesn't it? It lays out, 7 specific ways this could backfire strategically?
Yes, 7 major pitfalls.
So what's the first big risk it highlights?
Well, the first one is probably the most immediate: eroding trust, particularly within the Quad, but also other strategic partnerships.
How so?
Because protectionist measures, like tariffs, they just fundamentally undercut the whole spirit of economic cooperation that these partnerships are often built on. It could push India towards being more non-aligned, or even potentially leaning a bit more towards China, makes them less likely to cooperate on security stuff.
Okay, so weakening that key partnership, what's the next domino if that trust erodes?
Well, the source points to something pretty alarming. The potential strengthening of a China-Russia-India axis.
An axis? That sounds serious.
It's not like a formal anti-West bloc, not yet anyway. But India already has pretty close defense and energy ties with Russia, right? And significant trade with China. Tariffs could just give India another reason to diversify away from Western trade.
Yeah.
And you can bet Moscow and Beijing would be right there, ready to step in, offering maybe preferential deals, gaining deeper influence.
So we'd essentially be creating an opening for competitors.
That's the argument, yeah. Handing them an opportunity.
Okay, what about the economic ties themselves? You mentioned cooperation, but just the sheer interdependence.
That's the third point. Damaging that economic interdependence, which is actually a pretty powerful tool of soft power.
Soft power, diplomacy through economics.
Yeah, exactly. Trade, investment. These are levers in diplomacy.
Yeah.
And India, is projected to be the world's third largest economy by 2030. That's huge.
Wow.
So cutting off market access now, that damages future leverage you might have to, shape Indian policy or keep its economy aligned. Plus, it could speed up their Make in India push, maybe decoupling from Western supply chains faster.
And speaking of supply chains, that's been a huge focus, hasn't it? Moving things away from China. How do tariffs hit that strategy?
Yeah, that's the fourth pitfall, weakening the whole Indo-Pacific supply chain realignment effort.
But isn't India supposed to be key to that?
Absolutely. The West is actively trying to encourage manufacturing hubs in India, Southeast Asia,
Yeah.
precisely to diversify away from China. Tariffs just completely contradict that strategy. It makes it harder, riskier, more expensive for companies to actually make that move to relocate from China to India. So ironically, it could end up increasing dependency on Beijing, or at least slowing down the shift significantly.
So wait, the goal is to reduce reliance on China, but tariffs on India would actually work against that goal.
That's exactly what the source argues. It calls it a contradiction. Companies are already cautious about these big shifts. Tariffs just add another layer of uncertainty, another reason to maybe stick with China or choose smaller alternatives.
Which might not have the scale India offers.
Right. Then there's the fifth point, undermining future defense cooperation.
Okay, how does trade spill over into defense?
Well, India is one of the world's biggest buyers of defense equipment, and increasingly a partner for co-developing advanced tech things like jet engines, drones, naval systems.
Right, I've read about some of those deals.
So if you have economic tensions boiling over from tariffs, it can easily sour the mood for defense cooperation. It could affect joint military exercises, tech transfer agreements, even which countries India chooses to buy its weapons from.
That sounds critical given India's military importance. Okay, what about the view from the rest of the world? The global south, for instance.
That's risk number 6. The optics and influence in the global south. India sees itself and is often seen as a leader among these developing nations.
A voice for non-alignment sometimes.
Exactly. So if the West gets into a big public tariff fight with India, it really strengthens India's narrative that it needs to chart its own independent course. That, in turn, limits U.S. and allied influence over other emerging economies.
And potentially makes China's initiatives look more attractive.
It could weaken the West arguments against things like China's Belt and Road Initiative, yeah? If India feels pushed away, it might be less vocal in opposing China's economic statecraft.
Okay, so that's 6. What's the final point? The 7th risk.
Well, the 7th isn't so much a separate risk as a summary of the strategic damage. The source basically concludes, look, this wouldn't just be some isolated economic spat.
Right.
It would erode trust deeply, it would slow down that vital supply chain realignment, and it would push India towards, strategic ambiguity or even non-alignment.
Just when alignment is needed most.
Precisely. Just when the Indo-Pacific balance seems to really depend on keeping India engaged and aligned with Western interests. It's framed as potentially a major strategic misstep, a self-inflicted wound, essentially.
Wow. That really does paint a picture of how interconnected everything is. One policy lever potentially causing all these strategic ripples. It's almost unsettling.
It highlights the complexity of geoeconomics.
Definitely. So what does this mean looking forward? You mentioned that 10-year forecast. It compares 2 different paths, right? With tariffs versus without?
Yes, 2 very divergent futures based on this one decision point.
Okay, before we dive into those scenarios, what's the starting point? What's the baseline the forecast uses for, say, right now, 2025?
So the baseline context for 2025 they lay out is this. India is currently the world's 5th largest economy. It's projected to hit number 3 by 2030, so rapid growth.
Okay.
The Indo-Pacific is clearly the main stage for the U.S.-China rivalry. And that supply chain diversification away from China, it's happening, it's underway, and India is seen as a key place for that shift. Got it. So that's our starting line. Now let's look at scenario 1. Tariffs are imposed. The forecast breaks this down. Short, medium, long term. What happens right away in the short term, say 2025 to 2027? Okay, short term, 2025-2027, under the tariff scenario. First, immediate trade strain. You'd expect India to retaliate with its own tariffs.
Tit for tat.
Yeah, leading to U.S.-India trade volumes probably stagnating, maybe even falling. Investment also takes a hit. Multinationals get hesitant about big expansions in India.
Where does that investment go instead?
The forecast suggests countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, maybe Mexico could benefit from that diverted investment. And crucially, strategically, you see friction. India likely adopts a cooler, more distant stance within the Quad.
And Russia and China.
They'd be watching closely, ready to step in and fill any vacuum off for alternatives.
Okay, that's the immediate fallout. What about a few years down the line? Medium term, 2028 to 2031. Do things get worse?
Well, in the medium term, 2028-2031, the forecast sees that supply chain shift really stalling out.
The move away from China slows down.
Significantly. Especially in critical sectors, think electronics, semiconductors, even defense manufacturing. That relocation to India just doesn't happen at the hoped-for pace.
And India's reaction?
India starts to diversify its defense purchases more actively, maybe looking more towards France, Israel, or Russia, and less towards the U.S.
Okay.
And geopolitically, you see a clearer shift. India leans more obviously towards a neutral or maybe explicitly non-aligned position in the big U.S.-China competition.
So less of a partner, more of an independent actor playing both sides.
Potentially, yes. Using its position to maximize its own interests rather than aligning clearly.
All right, fast forward again. Long term, out to 2032, 2035. What's the end state in this tariff scenario?
By the long term, 2032-2035, the forecast suggests China gains pretty significant maritime leverage, without a fully aligned India acting as a counterweight in the Indian Ocean.
China has more freedom to operate.
Yes, potentially exerting more influence through its relationships with countries like the Maldives, Sri Lanka, and especially Pakistan, using those CPEC ports.
CPEC being the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor.
Exactly. Meanwhile, India's leadership role in the global south becomes more detached from any Western alignment. It might use that position to kind of extract concessions from both Washington and Beijing.
Playing them off each other.
That's the potential outcome. And the overall result for the region. The forecast calls it a tilt towards multipolar fragmentation. It weakens deterrence against Chinese expansionism. The region becomes less stable, more unpredictable.
Okay, that's a pretty sobering picture. Now let's flip the coin. Scenario 2. No tariffs. Cooperation continues, maybe even deepens. What does that decade look like? Short term first, 2025, 2027.
Right, the short term, 2025, 2027, and the no tariff scenario looks very different. You see significant trade growth. Bilateral trade between, say, the US, EU, and India grows rapidly, maybe double digits annually.
Investment.
An investment surge. India receives record levels of foreign direct investment, FDI, especially from Western firms pouring money into manufacturing, but also high-tech areas like AI, renewable energy, defense tech.
And the Quad.
It reinforces Quad unity. India feels more comfortable increasing its participation, maybe joining more maritime patrols, sharing more intelligence. The partnership strengthens.
Okay, sounds positive. Moving into the medium term, 2028, 2031, does that momentum continue?
Yes, according to the forecast. In the medium term, 2028, 2031, that supply chain realignment is viewed as a major success.
So India does become that China alternative.
Yes, a primary alternative for key goods, electronics, pharmaceuticals, defense components. You also see much deeper defense integration.
Like what?
Actual co-development projects taking off. Think next-gen naval drones, missile defense systems, maybe even fighter jet technology developed jointly. India really starts to emerge as a regional security hub for the Indian Ocean, maybe even hosting logistics or repair facilities for allies.
Okay, a much more integrated picture. And the long term, 2032, 2035, under this no-tariff, high-cooperation future.
By the long term, 2032, 2035, the forecast sees the Indo-Pacific balance being largely maintained. You have the U.S., Japan, Australia, and India forming this really robust economic and security framework.
And the effect on China.
It effectively deters Chinese adventurism. China is still a major player, obviously, but its expansionist tendencies are contained by this coordinated bloc.
And India's global role.
India uses its growing influence, maybe in Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America, to actively counter things like Chinese debt diplomacy, offering developing nations a different path, an alternative model.
So the overall result?
The result is an Indo-Pacific that remains stable, though still competitive. China is present, powerful, but effectively contained by a coordinated allied presence where India is a key pillar.
Wow. The contrast between those two scenarios is, well, it's incredibly stark, isn't it?
It really is. Night and day, almost.
Let's just quickly recap the comparison. If you put those 2035 outcomes side by side across those key factors, trade, investment, security.
Yeah, looking at the comparative outcomes by 2035 really drives it home.
So U.S.-India trade volume.
Stagnates or declines with tariffs.
Yeah.
Doubles from 2025 levels without them.
FDI into India.
Moderate, maybe diverted elsewhere with tariffs. Record highs without them. Potentially surpassing rivals like Vietnam.
Quad security cooperation.
Weakens with tariffs. Strengthens significantly without.
China's influence in the Indian Ocean.
And expands with tariffs. Is
Right.
contained without them.
Global South alignment.
India shifts neutral or non-aligned with tariffs. Stays generally west-leaning without.
And that crucial supply chain diversification.
Much slower shift away from China if tariffs are imposed. A rapid, successful shift if they're not. So when you lay it all out like that, it really frames the choice, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
The source suggests, tariffs might offer some kind of short-term domestic political benefit, maybe, But the strategic cost appears enormous. You'd be undermining, what, 10, 15 years of effort to build that Indo-Pacific strategy, making it much harder to counterbalance China in the long run.
It's genuinely eye-opening, seeing how one decision, seemingly just about trade, could echo through alliances, supply chains, global power dynamics for literally decades. It's such a powerful reminder, isn't it? In this interconnected world we live in, very few decisions really exist in a vacuum. Everything touches everything else.
That's absolutely right. And, it leaves you with the big question to think about.
Yeah.
How do nations balance these things? The immediate pressures, maybe domestic politics, short-term economic worries, versus these really complex, long-term strategic goals.
That's the fundamental tension, isn't it?
It is. And what stands out to you listening to this when you consider those two very different potential futures for such a critical part of the world? Where do you think the balance should lie?
Definitely something to ponder. Keep those questions in mind, everyone, and keep digging deeper. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.